Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back into the video today, and today I'm going to be going over my biggest winners and losers of the NBA draft lottery. So let's get into it. You had 14 teams that found out where they were, where they were going to be drafting in this year's draft. One team that had 2 picks in this year's lottery. And so, it was a very entertaining draft lottery where we saw 2 teams that already had a bright future. Or, the Mavericks kind of had a small few, like the reason I'll say, I say the Mavericks had a bright future is the Mavs have Kyrie, AD, all the other players they have. And, they were a team that probably would have been in the playoffs this year, maybe even gone far in the playoffs if fully healthy this year at the end of the year. And, meanwhile they got the first overall pick compared to the tanking teams like the Jazz, Wizards, Pelicans, Hornets. So that's the reason why I call them a team with a good future. They had a team that was in the play-in, a team that would have been in the playoffs, maybe deep into the playoffs if fully healthy, and yet they still got the number 1 overall pick. I'm not saying it was rigged or anything by saying that. It's just, compared to the other teams that were trying to get the number 1 overall pick, like the Wizards, the Jazz, those teams that tanked all year in order to get it, the Mavs have a better future, in my opinion, than those teams. But yeah, that's. I think it's pretty obvious. That's where I start off with the biggest winner. I'm going with 3 winners, 3 losers. So there are 8 other teams that are going to be left out. Or actually 7 other teams, since there was only 13 teams involved in this year's lottery, with the Spurs having 2 picks. So 6 teams we're going to be talking about. 7 others are going to be left out. All right, starting off with the winners, I think these 2 winners are going to be pretty obvious. It's the Dallas Mavericks winning the draft lottery, them being at the 11 best odds, only having a 1.8% chance at the number 1 overall pick, 8.5% chance at the top 4, and yet they still got in the top 4 and got the number 1 overall pick. They're the big winner. But also, I'll give that to the San Antonio Spurs as well as a big winner. They had a 26.3% chance of getting the top 4, having the 8th best odds in the lottery, and still were able to get into the number 2. And on top of that, got the number 14th overall pick as well. So they're the only team in this year's draft to have 2 lottery picks. So congratulations to the San Antonio Spurs. And so they're my second winner. My third winner, I'm going to go with my third winner being the top third pick as well, with the Philadelphia 76ers. And the reason I bring up this Philadelphia 76ers as that third winner is because of, the fact that they're one of the only teams in this draft tonight that could have, that were in real trouble of losing their pick. Now, Sacramento Kings did lose their pick as well to the Atlanta Hawks in this year's draft. They would have needed the Kings would have needed their pick to get to 12 or higher, in order for the Kings to keep their pick. But the Kings knew they were not going to keep their pick. They knew that the Atlanta Hawks, that draft pick that the Kings had, that is now the Atlanta Hawks, was either going to be 14 or 13. There was not a great chance that pick would go to 12, and the Kings would get to keep their pick. So, but meanwhile, the 76ers, there was real trouble that if this pick falls out of the top 6, Oklahoma City gets our pick. If our pick falls to 7, and it's not top 6, we're in trouble. We had a whole season of playing terrible and injured basketball, and we lost our draft pick. But that's not the case for Philadelphia, because they got that 3rd overall pick. They've got a chance to draft a great player now, but there's also a great chance that we could be talking about how they were drafting no players. And so that's why I have Philadelphia as a big winner. Now let's get to the losers. I want to spend more time on the losers, because this shows that tanking, it doesn't do anything in the NBA. It really doesn't. The Utah Jazz had the worst record in basketball this year, 17-65. And they still did not get the number 1 overall pick. They didn't even get a top 4 overall pick. They had a 52.1% chance of being in the top 4, and they still were outside of that at number 5. That's the biggest winner. That's the biggest loser. And then also the Washington Wizards, who were also really bad. Not as bad as the Jazz, but really bad. 18-64. They had the same odds of getting in the top 4 at 52.1%. Yet they were the 6th overall pick. This happens. I don't even know how many times where teams that are the best, teams that are the 50, have the best odds at 52.1% get in the top four, don't get in the top four. There were three teams that had 52.1% chance of getting in the top four, and only one of those teams got in, and that was the Charlotte Hornets. Now, my third loser I will go with is the Brooklyn Nets. For the Brooklyn Nets fell on two spots, to number 8. They were projected to be, number. They were projected to be number 6 or higher. Some people looked at them and thought maybe they can get to 5 or 4 potentially in this year's draft. They had a 37.2% chance of getting in the top 4, and yet they fell to 8. That's a big. I think that's my third loser I'll go with. But let me know your thoughts on. Here's the thing I will say. The reason why I think I'll go with them as a loser is they made a huge trade. They traded away the Phoenix Suns draft picks to the Houston Rockets for their own draft picks. And they did that in order they get their draft picks back, and those draft picks would be good. And this is one of the draft picks they traded back for. If they didn't make that trade with Rockets, this would be the Rockets draft pick, and that would have sucked. So. If they didn't trade back for you just look at it like that. They traded a lot of really good picks that are going to be the Phoenix Suns draft picks that they could have really got a lot of value in. Those draft picks are very valuable that the Nets traded to Houston, the Phoenix picks, and they did that so they can get their own draft picks back. There's still some draft picks left that they traded back for of their own. But this year's draft pick was one of the biggest reasons why they made that trade, and it's the 8th overall pick. So that's why I have the Nets as a loser. Let me know your thoughts on this year's draft lottery in the comment section, and peace out.